It's on YouTube.
Yeah, but you have to go to YouTube to do.
And in this photo you can see here, it's actually our cucumber house. So we grow cucumbers quite early. We have our fruiting crops like tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers. We start them in January and then we plant them out around Valentine's Day. And then we usually get a nice harvest in mid-March for cucumbers. And then obviously we get more cucumbers up until May, when we transition our crop over to peppers for the rest of the summer. So the cucumbers here, this was about, I think it was April 4th, and they were getting quite big and they're super, super tasty. So Sundance Harvest is an urban farm, and I would say it is rooted in food justice. The actual farm itself is a for-profit enterprise. So I wouldn't say that Sundance Harvest as a for-profit enterprise, because we're a corporation, is food justice, but a program we run that's a nonprofit program called Growing in the Margins, which I'll get into in a bit. I would say that's the core of all the justice work we do. But Sundance Harvest Farm is for profit. We have employees. We run a CSA. It's all cool. And then Growing in the Margins is where I really get to dive into the work that I love to do, which is teaching youth who have a similar lived experience as me. I grow produce year round, and I get to do that with the actual greenhouses. And having greenhouses is such a great thing. If any of you maybe have a backyard garden, you may have a small, cold frame, and you can see how much vegetables you can grow really in the winter, even if it's not heated. We also are going to be establishing 10 more tunnels on the field next season. So the program I run, Growing in the Margins, again, is like the pinnacle program I would say that we run for food justice. And I'll get into how that works in a bit. So this is our second greenhouse. It's not a full shot because my friend was kind of in the actual greenhouse, not taking it from the outside. But we grow lots of lettuce. In the wintertime, we grow a lettuce called Salanova. And if any of you have any farmer friends, you probably know Salanova is a very popular lettuce because all of the leaves are actually the same size. It's a hybrid, so all the leaves are grown on the same size. So if you cut the actual top off for salad greens, they're all the same size leaves, which makes it really easy to market. Also, I find that Salanova grows quite fast and it has a very good uniform appearance. So we grow Salanova strictly as a salad green, which is very fun. And here I am quite happy with the harvest. But yeah, the greenhouse is very flush. We have lots of greens throughout the winter time in both of the greenhouses.
Cheyenne, sorry to interrupt. We can't see those slides that you're talking about. We're still seeing the slide with the tomatoes. There we go.
Oh, there you are.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the greenhouses are heated with propane. We don't really have to heat too much because in Toronto, the weather is not super, super cold. And we have an outdoor field space. So I just signed a lease to now have 1.5 acres, which is really great. And we grow lots of cool crops outside. So we grow crops such as, salad greens, and we grow field peppers, field tomatoes, herbs, root vegetables. We're mainly focusing on salad crops. So we're not going to grow things like corn or squash or cabbage, simply because as a farm that's producing, those crops take up more space. They only have one harvest, and we can't really have a quick turnover rate with those crops. So we mainly focus on salad greens that you would have, like, braised kale, chard, or just lettuce for a salad. So this might take a bit to load, so I'm just gonna wait till it's there. But Growing in the Margins is a free program. That's a drop-in program and also a mentorship program that I run. And Growing in the Margins is a really exciting program because when I started Sundance Harvest, I really didn't see any educational opportunities that were taught by diverse leadership. So when I started my farming journey, I really was excited to maybe have a mentor, but I sadly couldn't find a mentor who had similar lived experiences as me and will have to face the barriers that I was actually going to face as a journey I had into farming. So Growing in the Margins is a 12-week program. What we do is we have both an in-person and virtual option. The virtual option is available around the globe. The in-person option, we do field trips at different farms. For example, Food Share, they have a farm called the BCI farm, which stands for Burnham Thorpe Collegiate Institute. It's behind the TDSB. It's also called School Grown. You may know it by that name as well. It's a 2-acre farm that's in the photo you can see here. And we actually just did.
Again, Cheyenne, we're still just seeing the lettuce slide. The Growing in the Margins slide hasn't come up.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, great. I might actually try to share my screen differently if it's not showing up. Just give me a second. This might be better. Great. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is a better option. So with Growing in the Margins, the youth, they learn many different things. One of the things that they actually learn is how to run a business. So this program is actually not centered around gardening. It's more so centered around production. So many of these youth in the photo actually now work at Food Share, or they run their own farms in Guelph, or their own microgreen operations. But all the learning in Growing in the Margins is going to be centered around how to start seedlings, or how to market, or how to do business planning, or how to do crop planning, how to grow winter greens and things like that. So they're very centered around how to run a successful farm and how to run a successful enterprise. So with Growing in the Margins, it's been a success, I would say. We actually run cohorts every season, and the cohorts are about 12 weeks long. Sometimes we take off one season simply because, the farms get quite busy. But other than that, it's been quite a regular programming, and we do have field trips. So I'll talk a bit more about Growing in the Margins and actually why I started it shortly. But Sundance Harvest, we have a weekly CSA box, and I think this is quite a fun thing to talk about because our CSA box is called the Sundance box, and it's not just our vegetables, it's many different people's vegetables. So some of the youth are Growing in the Margins. They have their own farms now, and they're producing their own vegetables. And I decided one way to help them gain entry into the marketplace is actually to purchase their vegetables. So the Sundance box is a collective CSA box from farmers of color across Ontario. Many of the farmers that I actually taught through Growing in the Margins. So now their first year, they have an easy way to sell vegetables and a stable income through that. And that's something that I thought was a really good idea, because when I started farming, I would have loved a way to gain entry into the marketplace, because oftentimes when you're selling outside of a CSA as a new farm, your only options are larger scale wholesalers. And if you're not producing, 500 heads of lettuce, but instead maybe 50, then you're out of luck. So in this case, it's a nice small step toward if they wanted to wholesale on a larger scale, and they can use the Sundance box as a kind of a jumping ground to kind of see how they feel about wholesaling at a small scale, and I can help them with any questions that they have. So our Sundance boxes are sold out. I would say they're sold out for quite a while. We are doing intake for our winter one, but again, sold out. We also do workshops on the farm. We have a beekeeper on the farm. Her name is Selena. She runs a business called The Drip Honey, if you want to check her out on Instagram. And we do really fun collaborative workshops like Introduction to Beekeeping. We do workshops about garlic and how to grow great garlic. Other workshops we do about seedlings and how to grow awesome seedlings. And then, of course, we do one farmer's market called Different Grove Farmer's Market. We've been doing a bit less of that simply because it's not in person, so I kind of miss that environment of community. But I do really like that farmer's market. So there's a reason why with Sundance Harvest, I decided to primarily focus on education instead of food security. So food security is much different than food justice. Food security is simply having access to food. food justice is understanding why people don't have access to food or places to grow food. So it's actually thinking deeper into the critical analysis of, wait, why is the lack of food a symptom of something bigger? So with Sundance Harvest, I knew running a farm, you have tight margins, and I did not want Sundance Harvest itself to be a nonprofit, simply because there's so many amazing farms already in Toronto that are nonprofits that are doing such great work, such as, Food Share and Black Creek Community Farm. And I really valued and looked up to their work. And I decided, well, if Sundance Harvest was just another nonprofit, we would all be kind of fighting for the same funding. And also, I wouldn't actually probably be able to do the work I wanted to do. So in that case, I knew that because there's already so many amazing nonprofits, there was a void in the system. I could not find one successful, larger scale urban farm in the city of Toronto that was, one, devoted to paying its workers above minimum wage, two, really cared about creating lasting relationships with communities who are often not represented in agriculture, and three, really embodied the values I had of an ethical business and how an ethical business should be run. So because I couldn't find that, I decided to make Sundance Harvest kind of that piece. And with doing that alongside of running Growing in the Margins, Sundance Harvest has been a blueprint for many of the youth part of Growing in the Margins. Because I'm teaching this program alongside running this business for the last 2 years, I have a chance to tell them exactly how I run the business, show them my books, my financial statements, tell them my barriers, my hardships, my wins. And with doing that information and that knowledge they're gaining from me, they can put it into their own projects. So I really do believe that because there's already so many great nonprofits doing agriculture work, that I just didn't need to be another fish in the pond, and then I'd rather use my energy and my skills towards something that was missing, toward filling that gap. And I do fill that gap with the program Growing in the Margins, as there's currently no other program that is structured around learning how to start your own farm in a successful way. So I would say the justice work we do is more so that, offering free structured program for youth of color to have the environment that's around their peers, and also have a space to grow their own businesses. And it to, of course, expand and use my own networks in my own business life. Regarding sovereignty, food sovereignty is something that's incredibly hard to achieve. It's a goal of many people, but to actually achieve food sovereignty means, one, you need to have land back in decolonization. And in Canada, as we know it right now, that's currently taking a long time to happen. So to have true food sovereignty, that's kind of the foundation. So I can't really say Sundance Harvest does any food sovereignty work, because to do that, we would need to overhaul the entire system of colonialism. So instead, I would say we do food justice work, because we understand that the symptom of a lot of BIPOC youth not being involved in agriculture isn't because they're not interested in it. It's because there's no education opportunities for them to learn and to grow and to build communities and relationships that will help support their business down the line. And in the photo you can see here, I have a fennel that was growing. I don't really like fennel personally. Maybe you like it. But it was really pretty in the field, I will say that. Nothing beats fennel in the fall to look at. And the other photo, I'm holding my cucumbers, which was around, I think, April, when we got our first batch. We usually get hundreds and hundreds pounds a week of cucumbers. So it's always fun to play around with them whenever I can. So how did Sundance Harvest start? Sundance Harvest started in September 2019. It started fairly simply. I didn't have, any intergenerational wealth. My parents didn't farm. I grew up very, very working class with a mother who supported all my dreams and my goals. And I didn't have any savings to bank off of. I also barely graduated high school, and I decided not to go to post-secondary because I simply didn't have the grades to succeed or to get into the programs I was interested in. So with all that being said, I decided when I was 18 to travel to Cuba. I traveled to Montana. I traveled to Idaho. Went all across the West Coast by myself to figure out kind of what I wanted to do with my life. And many youths around that age kind of go on that quest. And if I could say anything to my future kid, I would 100% tell them to take a gap year, because to really find yourself outside of an education environment, like a structured environment like school, will allow yourself to find new opportunities and maybe try something you haven't thought you'd like. So with my journeys, I ended up falling into farming. And I decided, okay, I wanted to run a farm, but I didn't have any money, and I didn't have a large, like familiar, like a family's support regarding money. So I couldn't find family land and farm on that land. I didn't have that option. I didn't have the credit to take out a loan to purchase rural farmland. So instead, I decided to start a farm in the city. I got a $5,000 grant from the Care Cachet, and I actually bought the soil and the wood you see in this photo, and a couple harvest bins and a harvest equipment, but that's all. And just from that grant, I decided to just start growing greens, because greens are something that's super easy to turn into a profit. And then really from that point on, Sundance Harvest just snowballed, and then I just kind of had success. I didn't take out any loans or any debt for the farm. I wanted to just see if I could do it just with the $5,000, and I guess luckily it worked. So that's really how it started, very bootstrapped. It worked really hard for a while, and it ended up working, which I'm very surprised still today. So starting a career in urban farming was quite difficult for me. Of course, there's lots of barriers being a young Black woman. Aside from that, I didn't, again, see a lot of opportunities to get mentorship. I would say the biggest thing when I teach high school students is I think setting aside a lot of time for them just to ask me questions. It's really rare to see someone growing on the scale that I'm growing in the city, and extra rare. I think I'm
Cheyenne, we've lost your voice. You might want to flick your mic on and off.
fairly straightforward. I do wish that Toronto had a more robust urban agriculture policy. When I was in Vancouver, I was quite impressed with what they had to do with like backyard chickens and the amount of urban farms that were present in Vancouver. But hopefully, as I get older, I'll start doing more policy work. I am actually on the board of the National Farmers Union Ontario. So I've been doing policy work across Ontario with being the youth advisor. So why did it start? To put it simply, I truly do believe just giving youth the opportunity to grow within their own community is quite important. I remember growing up, I would be going to field trips and different programs, and oftentimes I felt like I connected most with other youth who were teaching me, because I felt like the power dynamics were less high stakes. I really do like the idea of youth teaching youth. So, I'm 24 years old, but I'm still kind of, I guess, a kid in a way. So me teaching someone who's 20, they kind of can understand, okay, if Sundance Harvest could do it at her age, then I can do it at my age. And I really like that idea of how Sundance Harvest is. Some people ask me, why didn't I work on someone else's farm? And I decided to not work on someone else's farm because everything I wanted to do, no one could teach me, in Ontario at least. There's some really awesome farmers in upstate New York that I follow, but there was really no farmer in Ontario that could actually teach me what I needed to know to start the farm. So it really did start because there was simply no one else doing what I wanted to do. As of right now, we're hiring a lot of staff. Next season, we'll have 5 staff members and 1 new manager. Her name is Maya. She's been a saving grace at the farm. She's such a good employee. And I also started because I want to actually be able to have regular employees. I do really value creating a job in an environment for youth who also have similar lived experience as me. So aside from just growing in the margins, I want to have a farm that could actually hire youth on a regular basis and year round, which is what we do. And here I am in a field, not a field, it's actually one of our greenhouses of kale. And the kale was really bountiful last year, and it's still bountiful this year. So I use social media because I'm a Gen Z, of course. But aside from that, I find it's a really easy way to share knowledge. Through videos, through photos, through captions. We've really been focusing on our social media in terms of just sharing the knowledge of how we grow. We have around 32,000 followers on Instagram or something. And for a while, I was doing these videos where I was teaching people how to trellis their tomatoes, or why it's important to compost, or how to fertilize your crops. And just by doing those videos, I was being able to share information to other people. A lot of the youth who follow me actually aren't at all in Toronto. I have many people who are global, which is why Growing in the Margins is also now a virtual program, because I do understand that, you know, someone might want to know how to start a farm, but they may not be able to come to the in-person class. So I do use social media mainly as an educational tool. I find that it's quite helpful, and it's really easy to engage people in my age bracket because they're often on these platforms. So building diversity within agriculture looks like a few things, and I can speak to how Sundance Harvest has really spearheaded going at it. The first thing simply looks like having true leadership. So if, you know, the entry level people in your board or at your job are the only people of color, then that basically screams that there's not true representation. From the work I've done regarding helping boards become more equitable and other farms becoming more equitable, just having people of color in power positions is very, very important. Even if the environment is seen as less hierarchical and more ecological, it's probably not. So just having people of color in positions of power and decision making will help level the playing field and ensure all voices are heard. And this is pretty much a no-brainer. If you want to, you know, have a farming organization or nonprofit and it's supposed to be for everyone, then everyone should simply have a voice. That's the best way I can really frame it, is just making sure everyone has a seat at the table who's represented in the actual organization and in the programming and communities. So that's the basis of diversity, just having people who represent the groups that you're serving. Aside from that is understanding that everyone has different lived experiences. You know, everyone's going into life with either barriers or I don't want to say privileges, but things that help them in life. For example, for me, I'm not queer, but most of my staff are, and that's a privilege I have to be a woman who is like straight, because I don't actually have to face an extra barrier in life of being queer. So that's the simplest kind of way I can go forward with this. So with diversity in agriculture, it's important to ensure all perspectives are heard, all perspectives are represented, because even if I have good intentions as, you know, a queer ally, I still don't have that lived experience. So I don't face that barrier. So I shouldn't be kind of speaking for that group, and I should make sure that group has representation in any way I'm running my farm. So we really try to do that at the farm with their hiring practices. We really try to encourage a diverse workforce, because, again, if I want to speak about diversity in agriculture, I should actually preach it and do the action. Aside from building diversity in agriculture, it also looks like people of color actually having a stake. So it looks like us having opportunities to access land. It, of course, looks like land back. It also looks like us being able to share ancestral knowledge regarding seed saving, growing certain cultural crops, and things like that. A really good example I can give you of what diversity kind of looks like in action is Foodshare has a project called the Flemo Farm. And the Flemo Farm is a farm in the east end, the northeast end of Toronto. And what they've done, which I think is beautiful, is they've actually parceled off land, not small community garden plots, but instead larger pieces of land. And they've allowed residents to grow food there and actually sell the food. And Foodshare understands that food insecurity is not caused by a lack of food, it's a lack of resources. And that resources could be a lack of income to actually purchase the food, or a lack of growing space to grow the food. We don't have a food scarcity in Canada. We have a resource scarcity. The minimum wage is too low. There's a housing crisis, all of that. But there's an abundance of food. You can simply go to your local Loblaws and look at the dumpster, and there's food there. There's food that's thrown out every day. So regarding food security and food justice, Foodshare understood that it wasn't just giving someone a piece of bread or giving someone a baguette or, or an orange. It was actually giving them the opportunity to grow for themselves and have autonomy. And autonomy is one of the biggest words I think people should take away from this, is just allowing these groups who are marginalized within agriculture to decide what they want to do. And in Foodshare's case, that community really want to have a way to grow food and sell it, and therefore start their own small enterprises. And it's been a success from what I've heard and from visiting. And that's really how I think that they could build diversity within agriculture, is they provide these opportunities and they say, hey, as an organization, we have these resources and we are going to give them back to the community that's underserved. So that's really how you build diversity in agriculture, representation that's true and that looks like actual power put in the hands of those underrepresented. And then, of course, resources being given to them to build up their community and build up their own projects. And in the photo, this is some yellow zucchini we were growing at the farm. It was super tasty, but zucchini, of course, produces a lot of fruit. So we had a bit too much last summer. So the most simplest reason why diversity and equity matters is because the more people growing food, the more carbon that's sequestered within the soil, the happier the planet is. The more people, running small farms, the better chance we have of fighting the climate crisis. The better chance we have as a future of having cleaner water because, organic and ecological farming ensures that the waterways tend to be more safer than conventional synthetic farming. And of course, we get to see many of a diversity of an ecosystem from, the snails to the cardinals to the blue jays to the earthworms, all the different critters in the ecosystem being supported because small diversified farms allow for more habitats for birds. For example, my farm, we have many different hedgerows of fruit bushes and perennial flowers, and we have such a diversity of birds. We actually had blue heron keep stopping by regularly at the farm and visiting us because we have that diversity. So the more people who feel comfortable and supported to join farming and food growing means more of that. So the more ecosystems protected and cared for, more carbon sequestered in soil, more healthy food grown close to home, just simply more of that, which is the kind of a no-brainer, right? You want more people to do this great work. And a simple way is to just ensure that everyone feels supported in this career. And the best way I've seen people feel supported is to provide resources, whether that be space for growing, capital to start up, or of course, like Growing in the Margins does, education, which allows someone to plant their own seeds and tend to it how they see fit. But sustainable industries is something that a lot of my friends are interested in, and across the board, even for my friend who works at this company that builds solar panels, it's kind of been the same thing, just making sure that people have a space to be heard. And of course, we honor their truth. You may not agree with someone's point of view on the prejudice and discrimination they face, but again, that's their lived experience, that's their truth, that's them going to life every day as that person. So that's kind of something to take with that as well. If some people are a bit bristled at the fact of having more diversity in sustainable agriculture. In the photo you can see here, it's a beautiful tomato, a heirloom tomato. I can't remember the name, but that was a gorgeous one. I think it's called Indigo Rose. So this is me with some of our tomatoes. We harvest hundreds of pounds of tomatoes a week in the main season. I'm laughing because I'm just thinking about having to do it again next summer. But youth leadership is quite important because, in a simple way to put it, youth are the future. In the 70s, youth are the future. In the 80s, youth are the future. In the 1900s, youth were the future. And to have youth lead means that they get to actually have a stake and a role in designing what the future that they will live in looks like. And that's kind of the easiest way I could put it. As I get older, I'm probably not going to be running Growing in the Margins anymore. I made the decision, when I turned 30, that Growing in the Margins will be led by someone who's in their early 20s, because I still do want to keep youth teaching youth going forward. And when I'm 30, I might not actually understand the same concerns and the same perspectives as someone who's 20 will have about their future and what they're worried about or regarding farming and the environment. So youth leadership is important simply for that. I don't believe that youth always need to be mentored to actually have a perspective and to start a career. I was never mentored by anyone older, and Sundance Harvest turned out fine. I do believe that the key thing with youth doesn't always have to be mentorship, but it just means having space to grow and try things out. Having space to fail, having space to succeed, but overall just having their own space to do their own thing. I remember when I started Sundance Harvest, a lot of people were concerned that I didn't have a mentor, and they were always saying, this won't work out, and you need a mentor to figure out how to run a successful farm. And I just kept saying, well, if I fail, I fail. I'll just get up again and try something different. And that's exactly what I did. And just having that space with other friends around me who are also youth allowed me to kind of fall through, you know, go through the mountains and go through the peaks and valleys of the journey of farming. So that's really why youth leadership is important. And if you'd like to encourage youth leadership, you know, at your prospective careers, or maybe you're on a board, the simplest way to do it is to simply have a youth advisor on your board. I noticed a lot of boards have been doing this lately, is just having a position, setting it aside for youth advisor. Because oftentimes for board applications, let's say there's lots of great applicants, maybe the youth person will be considered less desirable because they don't have a lot of lived experience in the topics your board has. But if you have a separate position just for youth that helps advise the board in terms of the youth perspective, that could actually be a great way to encourage youth leadership within a board. The National Farmers Union that I'm a part of literally has that, and I'm the youth advisor. And being on a board, you know, and the youngest person amongst people who are in their 50s and 60s has still allowed me to have some leadership and some say, because my vote still matters. My vote still counts in terms of voting for our board decisions. So simply put, that's why it's important. And a lot of youth are smarter than people give them credit for, and they know exactly kind of what they want to see in the world. So give them free reign if you can. Making space for autonomy. So what Sundance Harvest tries to do, because as we've expanded, is we make space for other farmers of color, especially Black farmers, to grow. Selena is a prime example. She's expanding to 5 hives at our farm next season, and she's going to be growing so much bees. I'm so excited for her. Ernest, who runs Sarn Farms, he's actually farming on half an acre that Sundance Harvest will be giving to him to grow food, and he's going to be growing for our CSA as well. So those are just 2 examples of how we try to make space for autonomy. We also try to make as much collaborations as we can with other people across Toronto who are aligned with our vision of what we'd like to see with urban agriculture in the future. So simply put, use your voice and advocate. I hope what I said today rings some bells, and maybe you can take what I said into your own life, into your career, maybe with your friend groups, and just continue the conversation of youth leadership in agriculture and also equity in agriculture. And I'm going to take some time, you know, we have a solid 15 minutes to answer any of your questions you have. I'm super excited.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to jump in and take the privilege of first thing, because I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to put up, where'd it go? I'm going to put up my browser, which is somewhere, and it's, is that it? Nope. All right, I'll just ask this question. Recently, Toronto Council passed a Black food sovereignty motion or plan. And what's your feeling about that, and how should people be taking advantage of it?
Yeah, so I'm not a part of it. For Sundance Harvest, thing we're focused on is creating opportunities in terms of having youth have space to grow food. So regarding the Black Food Sovereignty Plan, I don't know much about it because I'm not really involved in policy. Really what Sundance Harvest is trying to do is expand and have more land space, because there's a lack of land space for a lot of youth like myself to actually start their own businesses in the first place. So much so that Sundance Harvest is actually purchasing land in North Ontario and starting a land trust in the next couple of years. So I don't have much thought on it. One thing I would say is I think any food sovereignty plan, if it doesn't include preserving and conservation of rural farmland, then I don't have a lot of faith in it. Simply put, because the actual act of having space to grow food and the act of conserving farmland and stopping it from being developed, like what we're seeing around Hamilton right now, That is the most integral thing. And I'm hoping the food sovereignty plan also takes into consideration of the Indigenous land back movement, because both of them will have to work coincide. But many Black and Indigenous communities are actually in solidarity. So I wouldn't be surprised if it actually included that already.
Thanks. Other questions?
So I see a question in the chat. I'll answer that, Kayla. Yeah. Do you run into any issues or concerns regarding soil contamination when creating urban garden spaces? Or have your students encountered from Toronto bylaw when creating their urban gardens? So for my farm, I haven't, because the farm I'm on has been in agriculture for 10 years. And before then, it was just lawn. So I haven't encountered any issues. We do soil tests and we make compost now on site. So we are pretty secure with our actual farming practices. Soil contamination isn't just an urban problem. In rural settings, if your farmer is spraying Roundup or any other toxic pesticide, that can get into your waterways. And if you're feeding things like pigs or horses, or even cattle or chicken, it can get into those animals as well. It can affect their manure, and thus it can affect your crop yields. So contamination in the city, it sucks. And oftentimes if you're growing near a gas station or previous gas station or railroad tracks or construction site, those are some red flags you really want to look at. But if it's not that, then I wouldn't be too concerned. You can always send a soil sample test to the University of Guelph, which is what we do. And aside from that, we haven't faced any issues. Most of the growing in the margins youth, the participants, they farm rurally now. And they also, their neighbors spray Roundup, and then they worry about their lettuce head, both urban and rural. But of course, different kind of things for both variables.
Hi. Clement, I wanted to thank you for bringing to my attention that food sovereignty.
Any
for the
other
Black
questions?
Can you hear me? Have you unmuted everybody, Clement?
I
Clement?
can hear you.
You are audible.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I just quickly looked up that city council decision, and I'll read it more carefully later. But I just wanted to share. First of all, Cheyenne, oh my God, I bow to you. You're absolutely amazing. And it's, what, one of the most interesting things that you said was that you decided not to compete with other not-for-profits. And I think that's just so incredibly commendable and brave. But there are very many people always, fighting for those few dollars that are, dished out. And I just think that's a really amazing thing that you did. I want to go back to food sovereignty, and just so people understand that. So, food sovereignty, clearly anything to do with food is about land. And that's why, as Cheyenne said, it, having to deal with land back movements and so on and so forth, that's all going to be a part of it. But food sovereignty is about, from my learning of it, reading and so on, studying, it's about having control over your food system. And that's why, of course, land is the most basic thing. But Canada is not food sovereign. And I think that's I just wanted people who are listening to this to understand that it's about a big picture, having control over your whole food system. And we don't. We get the bulk of our food imported. So in the city of Toronto, I don't know if it's changed, but if all transportation modes for the importation of our food were to break down, we would have 3 days worth of food in Toronto. That's not food sovereignty. And so I think it's really important that Cheyenne is doing what she's doing and that the city has recognized food sovereignty for the Black community, because as she said, this is a poverty issue. You know, we don't think about not being food sovereign and not feeling food injustice, because most of us are not marginalized peoples. And in order to help people who really readily want to help themselves, yeah, you need land. So I think that's a wonderful thing. But I think it's important for us to recognize that this is a huge problem for Canada because of where we are. Of course, climate change might change things a bit, but there has been a movement in the food justice, which actually sort of, you know, food security changed over to a concern for food sovereignty about 10, 15 years ago worldwide, because at its core is being able to produce your own food. And it's the fact that we have forced other people to produce our bananas and stop producing what they need for themselves, that they've become food insecure, like places in Africa that send green beans to the tables of French restaurants, yet the people there don't ever see that food. So the reason I bring this up is that you be aware and of movements such as from an organization called Food Secure Canada, who are always trying at the times of elections to bring this kind of thing to the attention of our politicians, because it is huge. And you know, we're all just sort of sliding by because we can buy everything. And it's the people who can't, who are the ones who are leading the charge. And we would do well to support them. Too bad all your CSAs are taken. Thank you. I think you're just amazing. You're just like, wow, I wish I had been you.
Thank you. I think everything you said is really resonating. And to think about like solutions for that, the biggest solution, well, first off, I don't support a globalized food system. I truly think that like when we're thinking about like hundreds and hundreds of years ago, Indigenous people thrived on their diet, and they thrived on what naturally grows on the soil. If tomorrow someone says globalized food system is over, you can't eat oranges, I would be okay with that. And I'd be like, that's just where I live. If I want to eat oranges, I'll move to Cuba. So I feel like just saying that that's a really big thing is the end of the globalized food system. Also looks like other countries, like Maria said, getting to keep their own green beans and getting to eat their own food and as close to their home as they can. The second thing regarding actually having food sovereignty for different nations is small scale farming. Small scale farming is considered by some people as not efficient, but actually in the global south, over 50% of farms are small scale farms, largely run by women and children. So small scale farming is very, very popular in the global south because it's the more efficient way to do things, because they oftentimes may not have a tractor. And if you're on 2 acres, you can still do that by hand. You don't need a tractor. You don't need to get a large loan to get these tools. So that's why you're going to see a lot of smaller scale farming there. So if they can do it there, then there's no issue to do it here. And I've seen small scale farming in Cuba, and how amazing it is there. So I think just having more land that's conserved and not turned into, you know, McMansions and developments is the first thing to focus on, because then we can have young people, you know, start their own farms and start these small farms and work us toward food sovereignty.
Ron, I have a question for you.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
Ron, will you ask Cheyenne about what the Horticultural Society should be doing to help? Ron, you have to unmute yourself. Unmute. Ron is muted.
Unmute yourself, Ron.
Okay, there I am. Thank you, Clement. Yes, Cheyenne, thank you once again for such a wonderful presentation. Thank you for joining us again. But yes, what can we do as an organization to do these things?
I would just say advocate as much as you can for farmland not being turned into developments. Horticulture is beautiful, and to see more horticulture, we of course need land to be conserved and kept in farmland and kept into growing space land. So that's the biggest thing I would probably say, is just kind of focus on that issue. And then aside from that is just making sure that there's space for, you know, maybe like youth to join, people who historically wouldn't be involved in horticulture societies to join. Yeah, just making sure there's space available and the space is welcoming and accepting. So that's really all I would say. But you guys seem really nice. I feel like that wouldn't be an issue, the latter.
Thank you.
I can think of a couple of things that the Hort could do, if I may say so.
Yes.
Continuing to support as much beautifying of the city as we can, as is our mandate, I think is really important. There's been, you're all aware of the Swallowtail Project Swallowtail, because part of agriculture is the pollinators. So even if we're not growing food per se on, you know, the Avenue Gardens on Roncesvalles, we can be growing plants that will help feed pollinators who might be flying pretty far away, or might just be flying to somebody's backyard where they've got tomatoes growing or whatever else. So I think that the Hort could play a big part in ensuring that we preserve, as we were unable to do with the butterfly gardens or with the gardens on Roncesvalles, to preserve as much of that kind of gardening as possible. And I also think, land being an issue that's come up a few times today, that the Hort could really, I mean, we've been here since 1834, advocate for the disuse, against the disuse of land. There are lots of, I mean, the apartment across the street, and I feel very responsible for this, for not doing something about it, but there's an apartment across the street, a building, which has tons of lawn that people could be growing food on. Supporting efforts like that. I don't know about initiating efforts like that, but if, for instance, I was to try to do that with the management at the building, I'd love for the Hort to like be behind me in that. But any of those kinds of efforts, I think that we could be growing so much food and more food in Toronto. And I'm not talking just about rooftops, which is a whole other issue, but everywhere where we see, you know, vast expanses of lawns. That's, you know, disused land, if you ask me. I'm all about food, right? So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Maria.
I have a question, Cheyenne. I'm just interested if, with this land discussion, do you have youth that come to you and you have so many that you either have a waiting list or you have to turn them away? And is it a lack of the land? Maybe like on the outskirts of Toronto, if we could find land, would you be able to find farmers for it? Like next
Yeah,
year?
that's a great question. So for
I can't hear.
No good connection.
because it helps the Wi-Fi.
Yes, probably will.
So for growing the margins, I don't turn away any youth. For the drop-in programs or mentorship, it makes it quite easy to accommodate the youth. And there's actually not a ton that are really devoted to agriculture. I would say the program is pretty stringent. So if someone's just simply interested in growing some tomatoes, it probably won't be the best program for them. So by saying that, there's not going to be a ton of youth, interested in actually farming. The second piece is 100% yes. There is like at least 10 I can think about at the top of my head who would like to farm but don't have access to land to lease. That's, an hour or 2 hours from the city. So that is yes.
Mhm.
I've heard of people who have, places out in the country and they have land and they have brought in people to come and farm. And maybe that's something that we could put out to the Hort membership is if you've got, more land than you know what to do with, save yourself all that, summertime lawn mowing and let somebody come and grow some food.
So right now, this is relevant. With the National Farmers Union, I'm leading their land linking workshops. So it's for all of Ontario. I'm leading their land linking workshop for farmers of color to find land to lease. So we actually have that covered, which is super great. And the National Farmers Union just hired a youth to be a land linking expert. So my friend Sunil, I got him a job, and he matches farmers with landholders in Ontario. So we have that going, which is super great.
Cheyenne, you have no downtime.
He isn't 30 yet, but she's smart enough to know that at 30, she won't be in her early 20s. I mean, the maturity that you've shown and everything you've said is just amazing to me.
Thank you. And thank you for having me today.
Oh, I'm so glad we connected. It's very inspirational.
Okay, if there are no more questions for Cheyenne, if anyone wants to ask Cheyenne a question, please bring it up now. Otherwise, we'll go into our closing reminders. Right, once. Good. Thank you so much, Cheyenne. And then Ron, could you remind us of a few things? You said something about the board, and I'd love to have you repeat it.
Once again, thank you, Cheyenne, for joining us. Again, such a wonderful presentation, and thanks for your information and knowledge and suggestions. Once again, the board. Again, I want to emphasize we can always use more people on the board. And once again, we did have somebody join us. And this person is of color, which is a great thing. But we do want more people to join if they can. Please suggest to people, people of color, LGBTQ, Indigenous, and let them know that we want more diversity on the board and let them know that, yeah, they can come in and have their say. Of course, they have to be a member of the Hort. So just spread the word and let people know. And once again, the AGM, if I'm correct, I want to get the right date. It's the
November 25th.
November 25th. Okay, thank you. So AGM is on November 25th. So there's time between now and then for those who are interested.
29.
And also, once again, as I mentioned, we are going to amend the online meeting addition to our constitution. So we're going to be discussing that as well. So until then, be safe. Have a great month. And once again, for those who have joined us for the first time, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And also visit our website, www.parkdaletoronto.com. And if you have any questions, please drop us a message. And also, if you want to receive our newsletter, please email us at newsletter@parkdaletoronto.com. Take care and have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Keep well.
Bye-bye.